Hello, all, and welcome to Overtime. Before we begin, um, let's just, yeah. All right. Before we begin, I do want to remind people that we are splitting the channel. Overtime is going to be its own channel now, and that is we're actually simul streaming right now, simulcasting to both In Time and Overtime. We're going to wait until Overtime gets a few more subs. Would like it to at least hit 100 before we do the split, but we are trying to get it to 100. If you haven't subscribed yet, and even if you think that maybe you're not going to be following Overtime, if you can sub at least for a little while to sort of help the channel get going, we'd appreciate it. But it's these Overtime shows are going to be simulcast to both channels for at least a little while, and then at some point we're going to make the split official, just to make it easier for people who are interested in one content over another. So you will also see that the link is down below. Link to the new Overtime channel. Yeah, the process, it really depends on once we have enough subs that we think that channel can sort of sustain itself, I think is part of the metric. And then the other metric is how long it takes for us to get much of the content over. We've gotten some of the content over, but porting thumbnails and all this other stuff, descriptions, it takes a little while. I can't just move it on YouTube. But honestly, I think the biggest indicator will be just the number of subs. So anyways, thank you all for joining us. It's going to be an interesting show tonight, I think. This country is at a crossroads when it comes to its civilian policing authority. Officers everywhere are examining themselves for answers to this problem that we as a country find ourselves in, and trying to answer the question, do we double down on militarizing the police force and resisting transparency in the name of our own safety against weaponized criminals? Or do we trust various agencies that are criticizing us and adopt a more open and non-confrontational approach? And I think there's been a lot of dialogue from officers and officers talking about their own experiences, and saying that I've heard many officers supported the verdict on the Derek Chauvin trial and thought he should be found guilty, but they were more concerned about what's the attitude going to be after that. And I think it's something we're all going to have to forge our way together. Some people have viewed the trial of Derek Chauvin as an example of a rogue officer being held accountable for his actions. Others see it as a sign that this country has turned against law enforcement. At least I should say these are I think many officer views. And there's a growing sense in this country that law enforcement is broken and that the blue wall of silence is unacceptable. It sows distrust and paranoia in the civilian population for the officers that are armed with lethal weapons, among other things, and authorized to use those weapons as they patrol to keep us safe. So we are seeing an increased level of stress in officers, resignation amongst officers who are facing this new tension, and questions over whether officers are supposed to be warrior fighters fighting a criminal element against which we must always be vigilant, or stewards of a peaceful and prosperous society, or maybe just human shields expected to put their lives on the line, sacrifice so that they are lost instead of an innocent civilian. At the center of all of this controversy is body cameras. Cameras mounted on officers, which can protect them against false allegations and can implicate them when they violate protocols or break the law. These cameras have given us a unique insight into the lives of the men and women who protect this country. However, already since the Chauvin trial, we've seen multiple releases of body cam footage, which has shocked us. 2 days ago on Overtime, we showed you the body footage of the last moments of Mr. Gonzalez, who died while being pinned to the ground, at least 250 pounds in weight. While on the ground, he was flailing, trying to breathe, as one officer had a knee on him, at least for a brief period, and his hands were cuffed behind his back, impeding his breathing. Andrew Brown Jr., a 42-year-old black man, was shot 5 times by deputies last week. And this happened as they were trying to serve a warrant on his home and car. The final blow was a shot to the back of the head. district attorney has said that the cam footage shows that Mr. Brown struck two officers with his car. The family disputes this account, and at present, that I'm aware of, there is no evidence of any of the officers being treated for any injuries as a result of this encounter. There was a request made for public release of the cam footage. This is in California, so a court actually must permit the footage to be released. The request was initially only partially granted. The family was allowed to view the footage, and no one but the family. The family has, in fact, since viewed a 20-second clip of the footage. The attorney has described that clip as, quote, an execution. The remainder of that footage, as well as the footage from the other 6 deputies who were there, has been withheld. 3 of the deputies resigned. 4 of the deputies were placed on leave, but have since been brought back after the footage showed that they had not fired their weapons. Another request has gone before a judge. This one is expected to be granted, and we believe that the footage from all 7 cameras will be released in full in reasonably short order, probably before the end of the month, which is getting up to, so let's say maybe the next 2 or 3 days, I suppose. Meanwhile, Attorney General Merrick Garland has said that the Justice Department is launching an investigation into whether or not Minneapolis police are engaging in excessive force and discriminatory practices. The next day, Garland announced that the Justice Department was also launching a broad civil rights investigation into the practices of the Louisville Metro Police Department in the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor more than a year after the incident. These probes, which actually were reasonably regular, but have been cut back during the sharply cut back during the Trump administration, are not criminal probes into these incidents. There are other criminal probes that are occurring into these incidents. These are probes based on what is called, quote, well, these are, quote, a practice inquiry, meaning that these are inquiries into the practices of these police departments, and it is there to determine whether or not these departments are discriminating based on race or failing to provide adequate services to those with disabilities and those that they serve in general. Meanwhile, a 188-page report that has been described as, quote, devastating, was released by a commission of human rights lawyers and commissioners from 11 countries and has demanded that the U.S. be held accountable for what they claim is a long history of violation of international law and, in some cases, crimes against humanity for the systematic killing and maiming of African Americans by police in the United States. You will find that report linked below. We have a link to it in the description. They claim that there's a prima facie case for crimes against humanity and that this should be investigated by the International Criminal Court at The Hague. And they have called on The Hague to begin an immediate investigation for possible prosecution. They they accuse that states have denied, they have accused the United States, of violating its international human rights obligations in everything from traffic stops and stop and frisk to what they call murders and severe deprivation of physical liberty, torture, persecution, and other inhuman acts. The report claims that the U.S. has operates under a culture of impunity in which police officers are rarely held accountable or that such acts are dismissed as the actions of a few bad apples. Now, we should note that last I checked, the U.S. was not a participant in the International Criminal Court. This is in and of itself a crime, in my view. We helped establish the criminal court, but once we realized that it would allow other countries to have at least some legal jurisdiction in the United States, we refused to participate on the grounds that it was unconstitutional, giving other countries obviously some legal say over the standing of Americans on U.S. soil. I don't particularly buy that argument. They have that standing when we're outside, and France can sue an American citizen, but nonetheless, that was the argument. So the ICC does not actually have jurisdiction over the United States, so it looks like they will probably not respond to this. If they do, it would be non-binding and symbolic. Be curious to see what they do. But since they don't have jurisdiction, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not going to. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Does this include Americans' treatments of immigrants? This particular file did not include that. I would be a little surprised if one wasn't pending. This report was comprised. Actually, this report started well before the Chauvin incident, and they've been working on it for some time. What they have decided is a number of countries that are involved on the ICC have decided that they are considering sanctions against the United States. These sanctions were used against South Africa when South Africa could not be punished for their participation in apartheid. Rather than try them in a criminal court, which has no jurisdiction, mainly the Hague, the countries that participate in the criminal court and the United States engaged in sanctions against South Africa. And these sanctions were actually extremely effective and were one of the elements that resulted in apartheid ending when it did. These sanctions applied tremendous pressure, and now there is a movement to apply such sanctions to the United States. We'll see where that goes. Meanwhile, when COVID first struck, it was thought to be the great equalizer. It affected the wealthy and the poor alike. Doesn't matter whether you are rich. Yeah, I just said rich or poor, so let me repeat myself. It doesn't matter class or status. None of these things mattered. Everybody was just as vulnerable to everybody else. And for a moment, we were all in the same boat. And I remember as we covered this and covering especially Italy when it was first hard hit, realizing that these were our brothers and sisters, and very much in the same thread where when the Twin Towers fell, the headlines in France said, "Today we are all Americans." When COVID struck Italy the hardest, we were all Italians, and we were all brothers and sisters, and we all had ideals of trying as a planet to solve the first crisis to really affect every living, breathing human being in about 100 years. And I'm not going to say that it was worth it for that alone, but that was at least a good feeling and a bright spot that for once we all had something that we knew we had in common more than Kennedy's description of our common mortality. But as America in particular, A, did not take it seriously, and then B, as a result of this, became the greatest victim of this in terms of percentage of population that's got it in total overall deaths, we also became the country that started hoarding any drug that we thought could help us fight this at the cost of other countries, and sometimes drugs that couldn't help and were hurting victims of other illnesses like malaria because these drugs were no longer available. We now know that COVID does affect countries differently because countries like the United States has a 43% now of its population with the first, at least one of two vaccine shots. Great Britain is up to 64% of the population. But by contrast, India has only 8% of the population. Now, there are, in fact, many reasons for this, and people shouldn't just assume it is because of poverty or racism. I do think these things play a part, but you have to realize that, if I recall correctly, there's 1.8 billion people living in India. So they do need greater doses. But having said that, still, the population that has, and the number of doses that they've received is extraordinarily small. Now, the U.S. has committed to giving 60 million doses to be donated to countries that cannot afford their own. How much of that will go to India, we don't know. But if all of it went to India, that would still represent less than 3% of the doses outstanding that they need to protect their population. Now, right now, if you look at what's happening in India, it's pretty grim and it's awfully brutal. Hospitals are overwhelmed. They are overwhelmed in a greater number than the U.S. was. And I remember quite distinctly the U.S. starting to show significant fractures in its medical system. Texas, which had an average wait time of 12 minutes in the ER, went to 12 hours. If you were going to the ER for anything, if you had a heart attack, you had a 12-hour wait. That is now India, and that is through huge swaths of the country, not just individual states like happened in the U.S. And they don't have a first world infrastructure in these areas as we do. So it's affecting them far greater. Now, they are seeing currently the height of the exponential rise that we all see when this virus goes unchecked. And the problem is this. Right now, actually, despite the fact that things look very grim over there, they're not as bad as they could be by any stretch of the imagination, because they actually have a smaller infection rate than most other countries. The problem is the growth, and the problem is the growth in a country that doesn't have the capacity to deal with it is already at its maximum medical capacity, and in a country that has 1.8 billion people. So at this point, if vaccinations at this rate is expected to take, as I recall, about 1.3 or 1.4 years at this rate to reach even a 60% vaccination rate in India. The amount of lives lost during that period of time, if this is unchecked, would be catastrophic. So India, a country that once was heralded as the quintessential sort of, I'm sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of as the model for how to deal with it, has now unfortunately fallen back. And despite having a reasonably low percentage of their population infected, at least compared to the United States, is at capacity. So I think I don't see at this point how we're going to be able to avoid a humanitarian crisis in India, and probably within the next couple of weeks. We've talked about the numbers and how they work briefly. You know, you get infected, you can carry it for, I think, as I recall, up to about 11 days before showing symptoms. You can infect people once you show symptoms. It's still another 2 weeks before it's likely to kill you if you're going to be one of the fatalities. So there's a lag period, and we are now at the head of a spike that is unchecked. So we will keep an eye on India. It's in a very difficult position. So, meanwhile, there's been an effort to recall California Governor Greg Newsom, and that effort has cleared the final hurdle, getting enough signatures now to put the recall on the ballot. Now, I've lived in California, so I've been through a lot of these. Recalls are frequent in California, given the nature of the state's special ballot system and how special elections and these recall initiatives work. I mean, they happen all the time. Indeed, this is the 6th recall attempt against Governor Newsom alone. The only successful attempt, however, and this is one of the arguments against this system, which is they have special elections to do this all the time, and they fail. It's a colossal waste of time. The only successful one was Governor Davis, who was replaced by Arnold Schwarzenegger, only in California. So we'll see. There's no, I haven't looked at any polling data as to the likelihood of this working, but we will see. We've also spoken about China's oppression and genocide of the, oh God, I still can't pronounce this correctly, Uyghurs, I think, through cultural retraining, forced relocation, imprisonment, and even murder. The U.S. declared in January that China was committing genocide against these people, and the United Kingdom, however, refused to do so, with Boris Johnson saying that, well, you know, we can't do it without, it's a parliamentary matter, and I can't do it alone. This was largely viewed as a dodge, a way to disagree with China's actions without actually having to offend a trading partner. The House of Commons has now disagreed and sent the only message they can send to Boris Johnson, which is a non-binding motion calling on the Prime Minister to fulfill his obligations under human rights law and declare China in violations of the human rights and engaging actively in genocide. Also, this week, we learned that the administration of Donald Trump blocked an investigation into why it withheld $20 billion in hurricane relief from Puerto Rico following one of the greatest natural disasters to hit the U.S. in 100 years. Hurricane Maria, which resulted in the death of at least 2,975 people, within striking distance of the number of people who died on 9/11. The HUD Office of Inspector General found an unprecedented number of new procedural hurdles and processes required for the approval of the disbursement of these funds, making it impossible for the HUD to release these funds on time. Former HUD Deputy Secretary Brian Montgomery said that he felt that the disaster relief funds were being held hostage deliberately by the Trump administration. Two former HUD officials have claimed that their congressionally mandated deadline for disbursement was deliberately missed. And Ben Carson has defended HUD in this. Has defended HUD in this regard, saying that one of the reasons the money was not distributed was Puerto Rico's inability to manage these funds in the wake of corruption and financial irregularities. First of all, they were not permitted to make that decision. The funds had already been allocated. And second of all, those funds were actually diverted from Puerto Rico to Texas and Florida, both of which were states that had very similar corruption and financial irregularities. What they also had that Puerto Rico doesn't have is a voting population, and they are recognized by the average citizen as members of the United States, while Puerto Rico falsely is not. There are still Americans who don't realize that if you're born in Puerto Rico, you're an American. You get an American passport. What you don't get is the right to vote for Congress or for president, unlike D.C., meaning that no matter how much money you send to Puerto Rico, you can't get them to vote for you. So at this point, it looks that these funds have been diverted to states that could vote Republican and might actually have an influence in that election. And again, Texas and Florida. Big shock. At any rate, since the original allotment, nearly $69 billion has been set aside from for Puerto Rico to help in recovery from the hurricane, but only $19 billion has been dispersed. The Biden administration has said it is removing, actually it has since removed, I should say, all of the HUD restrictions put in place by the Trump administration. Meanwhile, Arizona's Republican-controlled Senate has subpoenaed and seized all of the 2.1 million ballots and counting machines in Arizona's Maricopa County, along with numerous hard drives. They've been turned over to, this is not a joke, Cyber Ninjas. Cyber Ninjas is a private Florida-based consulting firm with no experience in forensics in regards to election. In fact, they have absolutely no election experience whatsoever. Cyber Ninja owner Doug Logan has, in fact, repeated a number of unfounded conspiracy theories on Twitter on an account which has since been deleted. This has alarmed election officials, since there are many consulting firms with an excellent record of auditing for any number of states. And there are many of these firms both in Arizona and in other states in the union. One particular point of contention for most election experts is the fact that many of these recounts will be done by hand, and it appears that there is no transparent procedure for adjudicating what a voter intention is when it's not obvious. We've seen this problem before. I'm not going to get into the details. That's an in-time thing if we ever want to cover it. But suffice it to say, that gets tricky very quickly. Most of the observers are conservative and or Republican. More than I think it was roughly 76% of those who have been put into positions of either hand counting or observing these counts are Republican. Quote, "We are going to see a new norm where we don't accept the outcome of an election in a free and fair and just democracy. I think it's incredibly problematic," said a former Maricopa County election official. Logan himself defended his company and said, quote, "There are a lot of Americans here, myself included, that are really bothered by the way our country is being ripped apart right now. We want a transparent audit to be in place so that people can trust the results and everyone can get on the same page." Meanwhile, federal investigators issued search warrants on Wednesday for Rudy Giuliani, including all of his electronic devices. Now, I'm sorry, I want to just check this here. All right, yeah, we're good. They've also issued a search warrant on former Justice Department official, Giuliani friend, and wife of federal prosecutor Joseph DeGenova, Victoria, ooh, wow, Tonzing, who represented a Ukrainian oligarch. Actually, I'm sorry, who represented Ukrainian oligarch Dmytro Firtash. Wow, who is himself the subject of a federal indictment in the United States. The warrants stem from bribery charges, misuse of public funds, and a purported attempt to dig up dirt on Joe Biden's son Hunter in the Ukraine and to bribe and/or extort Ukrainian officials into using that dirt for political purposes to help Trump, as well as possibly working privately for Ukrainian officials or businesses to help them remove the Ukrainian ambassador. If Giuliani has done this, it would be a violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Michael Cohen, the former Trump lawyer who has been cooperating with authorities, tweeted when the warrants were served, tweeted, quote, "Here we go." This is thought to hail a new phase in this investigation, a much more aggressive phase, as warrants are issued usually only with probable, well, not usually, they're actually only issued with probable cause to believe a crime has been committed, and that a warrant will, in fact, turn up new evidence. So that, ladies and gentlemen, oh, actually, let me just do one more quick one, and then we'll have a brief discussion, and then we'll go forward, which was just because this was this came up, and I think this was a worthwhile topic. 3 armed speedboats operated by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard came within 68 yards of the U.S. Navy, of a patrol boat, the U.S. Coast Guard patrol boat in operation in international waters in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. personnel tried to hail the ships over radio. They didn't respond. The Navy fired warning shots, and the ships left. The Navy has said that these actions have violated international maritime rules, quote, rules of the road, and have increased the risk of miscalculation or collision. The U.S. and Iran is re-entering negotiations over the previous deal, which, to be fair, we claimed that we had withdrawn from. We kind of did, but we actually withdrew illegally by failing to certify that they had kept up their end of the deal, when in fact they had. We had no evidence that they had failed to do so, but we refused to certify that they had, which was a violation of the deal. So we didn't actually withdraw. We violated the deal. And we're going to see now if we can put something back together, whether you are for this deal or not aside. And I think there are many things that are positive about it. I will say this. I don't think it should be policy that every new administration can overturn international deals made by the previous one. That means no deal that the U.S. makes with any country anywhere in the world can be guaranteed to last longer than 4 years. That's an untenable situation and a huge fucking handicap. So I think it was catastrophic to unilaterally ignore and or violate this deal. And with any luck, we will put together some of the pieces. And most of the rest of the world will see Donald Trump as a hiccup in the record of a country that has otherwise usually done reasonably well. Our current charges of human rights violations notwithstanding. Rights violations. Wow. Probably a little more tired than I thought. Anyways, so what I'm going to do now, and thank you, Bregwin, for putting that link in. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, mods, all for contributing. I'm going to take a minute to, I've been ignoring the live chat. I just wanted to sort of get through this, and I was, I'm a little tired, so I do apologize, and I'm babbling and speaking incoherently. I'm aware that too many people, they can't differentiate between that and my normal. Yeah. So, let's see. Titan, for many of us, always knew there was rot under the veneer, vast room for improvement. Hopefully the light has recently shown our flaws. We'll have I think that may have been missed. Okay, so yeah. There are some ways in which I am very optimistic about the U.S., and we do have certain freedoms that other countries really don't have. Having said that, when we talk about the U.S., what's great about the U.S. is freedom. Out of, what is it? I think it's 103 industrialized countries, and 86, 87 of them have freedom as we define it. But nonetheless, so let's see. Do you still, question for Americans, do you still think you're living in the greatest nation on earth? That was never my opinion or view. I wanted to say Jack Black. No, it's not Jack Black. Oh dear Lord. Oh my God. Comedian Lewis Black has a great rant on this, and he says, "Well, look, we like to say that we're the greatest country on the earth, on the face of the earth, but if you're someone like George Bush, who's never even left the country, not even to Canada, most people get to Canada on a dare. If you haven't gone to Canada, how do you know that we're the greatest country? Maybe in other countries they're giving away shit for free. You don't know. You want to know what they give away for free in Canada? Healthcare." That's a rant by Lewis Black that I've always been fond of. Yes, many Americans brag about being the greatest country in the world, and we do have some advantages over a number of other countries that make us easily able to leverage our position as the world's only remaining superpower. So, yes, that ego has gone to the heads of many Americans as if somehow our birthright is to be the greatest. And that's not uncommon. That's what the Roman Empire felt before it fell. That's what the British Empire felt before it fell. We've seen this before. Yeah, the Bregwin, we're really bothered by how this country is being ripped apart. So we're going to rip it apart. I mean, they're just stoking. They absolutely have the minority position. So they're the ones ostensibly ripping the country apart. And if there was any truth to what they had to say, that would be one thing. But there isn't. And I normally say, well, in my view, there isn't. No, there isn't. That's an objective fact. How many courts have looked at this and thrown it out? Independent courts, including the representatives of the very states in which this is at question. This is a political move, period. End of discussion. Yeah. This is the worst country in the world except for all the others. That's yeah. All right. Let's see. So I didn't see any tags, and since I've been actually trying to keep up with two different live chats, I think I'm going to make I'm going to have to sort of settle on one versus another. It's a little discombobulating too. Yes, I did get my voice back, which I'm thankful for. My wife is a little less thankful, so are many members of the YouTube community. But my voice has gotten back. Thank you. Let's see. Any ninja experience? No. Well, you know what? With every story, there's always something where you feel you could have done a little more research just to make sure you have your ducks in a row before you go on air with something like this. I'm sorry, Daryl. We didn't check to see if they have ninja experience. I should have. That's my fault. I take full responsibility. No, wait a minute. We have an order of blame. That's Titan's fault. Yeah, no, we're just blaming Titan. Yeah, every time I say that, he knows where the skeletons are buried. So yeah, that may not be a good idea. I'm just going to hope he's got as good a sense of humor as I think he does. We're going to blame him anyway. No, we dropped the ball there. I don't know how many ninjas there are in cyber ninjas. I don't know if they're actually cyber or if they're real either. We just don't have those numbers on hand. I'm sorry. I will try to get them for you if you just be a little patient with us. So let's see. Freedom from what? Yeah, freedom. Well, okay. So the freedoms enumerated in the Constitution are largely built on Joseph Smith and a bunch of others in there. They're not that uncommon, but things like freedom of speech is something that actually most other countries, we're the only country that has it, to the best of my knowledge. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. No other country has it in the way that we do. It does on occasion cause problems, and we discussed some of those problems last time because it means you can't stop certain speech that's just really vitriolic or unfortunate, people who are posing as journalists, because we can't regulate journalists in this country. It's not possible to regulate journalists in the U.S., at least not in any way that I've found, because it would violate free speech. Americans looking at when we talk about what's happening in the UK, and they're putting back restrictions on what is it on protests, and or when they have the restrictions against transphobic comments. You can't do that in the U.S. You cannot make transphobic comments illegal. It can't be done. That's a little weird for us, but I do think that that is a valuable freedom, and whether it's enough to help us when we're maybe wanting in a few other areas, I don't know. But I stand by that one being at least one freedom that is different in the U.S. than others. That doesn't. Well, anyways, I think go to bed, Nick. You've done a really good. Well, thank you, Cheese Whiz. I really appreciate it. I probably won't be able to sleep. I have two sleep disorders because I have one, and I like to do everything big. And they haven't been bothering me up until a few months ago, and then they started, and now it's just been a consistent problem. Almost got it under control, and then last night just slept 2 hours, woke up for 2, slept 2 more, slept. At any rate, not to bore anybody, but I'll be able to sleep later tonight, I hope, for an extended period of time. We'll see. If not, you'll see me babbling again. Speaking of, we have coming up Oz from Tart. We're going to be having a discussion with him. I'm really looking forward to that because his description of what his life was like growing up as a child with religious parents was shocking, and I haven't heard anything to that extreme really since Marjo. So I'm looking forward to having that discussion with him, and I'm looking forward to seeing how we're going to format that. But that's scheduled. You'll see that up on the calendar. You'll also see we're having Randolph Richardson back for a second time, and looking forward to all that. So our Patreon meeting is coming up May 3rd. Is it May 3rd? Oh, geez, whatever. I think it's May 3rd. The first Monday in May, which I believe is May 3rd. Hope all of you will join us. That is scheduled for 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you have any questions about that, hit us up on the Discord. You can contact me. I'm also on Twitter, usually getting into trouble with somebody somewhere. And other than that, I think we're good. If you got it this far, I hope that means that you like the show. Liking and subscribing really does help the channel out. In this case, I'm going to do something most channels don't do, which is ask you to like and subscribe to 2 channels. Because we are moving over time. So if you find this content valuable, please do like and subscribe at a minimum, actually, really to overtime, and we're going to start transitioning over there. Looking forward to that. And I think that's going to be better for the audience. So thank you all very much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the Discord and catching up with you next week.